So that kind of covers the gym preparation. And let me move on now to the actual hiking part. So I want to say a couple of things first. One is I actually didn't know, honestly, how to prepare for this hike. Particularly given that I was, turning 71 just after I did the hike. I just didn't know how to prepare my body for the demands. So as a result of that, I overtrained for this hike. I believe I overtrained for this hike. And you can see, if you look at my video about the actual Rim2Rim hike, you can see I was actually in pretty good shape when I finished that hike. Now, I've heard stories about people doing the last 20 yards on their hands and knees. I've heard stories about people being carried up. I've had stories about people leaning on their hiking partners, and I was in really pretty good shape. But even saying that, I think I overtrained. And here's why I say that. I started my training in early May, which basically gave me about 18 weeks. I did the hike on the 20th of September. It gave me about 18 weeks. Now, for a number of reasons, I lost about 5 of those weeks where I could not hike. So really I had about 13 weeks to work with. But I want to say this, if you look at one of my earlier videos, I had just come off doing a 20-mile hike and I tore a couple of good blisters in my legs. I thought I had broken in my new hiking shoes after 30 miles and I hadn't. And when I healed up from those blisters, which was in mid-July, I was actually ready to take the hike. I felt ready to take the hike. And so really all I did from mid-July until mid-September was maintain the state of readiness that I was already at in mid-July. Now some of you might ask, well, if I was ready to go in July, why didn't I go in July? And the answer is because it was 120 degrees down at Phantom Ranch. And as much as I like hiking in hot weather, and boy, I really like hot weather hiking, I'm not hiking in 120 degrees. That's, to me, that's just a ticket for some real problems, some major problems. And, ultimately, how you hike this Rim2Rim trail is your decision. But just be aware, 120 degrees, that's some pretty savage temperatures to be hiking in. And again, this is coming from a guy who lives in the desert and just loves hot weather hiking. So yeah, I was ready to go by mid-July. So the reason I say that, we had a tree fall down. We had a lot of wind yesterday. We had a tree fall down over the trail. I was ready to go in mid-July. So that means really I was ready to rock and roll after about 10 weeks of training. Now, let me just shift hands here because the sun is changing positions. Between the beginning of May and the middle of September, I actually did 26 training hikes. In fact, I was on this particular trail for many of them. But that's how many I did, 26. Now, I only did 2 hikes in the 20-mile range. And I think one of them was 22 and one of them was like 23.8. And the rest of my hikes, the majority of my hikes, were between 14 and 18 miles. And in that group, most of them were between 15 and 17 miles. And so if you do the math, you recognize I average doing 2 training hikes a week. I wonder if I can switch now. I average doing 2 training hikes a week. And what I would do is I would take one hike on generally a Sunday, and then do one hike generally around a Wednesday or Thursday, depending on weather conditions. So, you know, I was hitting the trail hard. And on this particular trail that I'm on right now was the trail that I probably hit the hardest. And this, again, this is a 15-mile trail, but it gives me 7.5 miles uphill and 7.5 miles downhill. So it's a great preparatory hike. Now, as I look back on how I trained, and you know, we have to give some allowances, I think, to the fact that when you start getting up towards, you know, your early 70s, maybe it's fair to say that it takes longer to get in shape than when you're in your 30s and 40s and 20s. But as I look back on my hike, and as I look back at my preparation, I really think that you can probably train effectively for the hike and only do one hike a week. But if I were going to do that, if I were only going to do one hike a week, I'd make absolutely sure it was between 15 and 17 miles. That's just my advice. But, you know, you want to, you don't want to just survive this hike. Let me just see, I got a little bit of a problem with the sun here. I'm in a series of switchbacks on this hike, so the sun keeps changing on me. The position of the sun keeps changing on me. But anyway, I really do think that you can get by with one hike a week. But it has to be a long one, you know? And the other thing I would say to you is this. You have to dedicate, in my opinion, to do this hike successfully, you have to dedicate yourself to training to get yourself into shape. Now again, as I said before, I was coming off skiing, season of skiing, so I wasn't at a zero state. But yeah, I really felt good in 10 weeks that I was ready to go. I was confident I was ready to go. So you can even do it sooner, but you have to dedicate yourself to this hiking. You can't work it in. Well, maybe I can get a hike in tomorrow. Maybe I can get a hike in 3 weeks. You've got to set that time aside, and you have to apply yourself to it. Now, one of the people in one of my videos, I believe is actually, it was a fellow who I think is probably either a former ranger or currently a ranger. And in the comments section, this was in, I think, the epilogue video. In the comments section, he made the point that one of the major problems that the rangers see there is people overestimating their stamina levels and their preparation levels while they're doing this hike. So, you know, I think it's important to take his advice, and I'm just coming out of the first series of switchbacks. Take his advice and don't be that guy. Don't be that guy that overestimates their ability. You have to train. You absolutely have to train hard. There's just no way around it. There's just no way around it. So, I mean, it's only 10 weeks. Dedicate yourself to it, if you get in shape that quickly. Now, you know, if you're a person that's jogging, 5 miles a day, 3 times a week, you're also not a person in a zero state. So, you have to apply this whole agenda of training to, starting where you're at in terms of your stamina level. So that's about all I have to say about my hikes. Now, just one final thought about it. As you can see, I'm hiking in the mountains, and my hikes are that whole summer. The easiest hikes I took, I characterized as moderately strenuous. By the way, I actually kept a journal, a hiking journal, to keep track of the hikes I took and prep for the Rim2Rim. And my hikes that I prepped for went from moderately strenuous to extremely strenuous. You know, I realize that's a subjective term, but you know, I wasn't on level ground doing my training. I was always in the mountains here, and I was always doing an uphill or a downhill. So getting back to how you might prepare for this hike, one suggestion I would consider is that, keeping in mind the worst part of the hike is at 10 miles from this Silver Suspension Bridge up to the top of the South Rim. One of the suggestions I would make is that you get on the treadmill at your gym or in your personal gym, and you just do 10-mile uphills to get your hamstrings and your knees accustomed to climbing for 10 miles. It doesn't matter if you live in the mountains or you don't. The treadmill can do a great job. And if you're not self-conscious about it, throw a backpack on. One of the things that I did throughout the entire season, and I had to do this because I was hiking in very hot weather here in Utah. We had our hottest summer on record last summer. But I was carrying a 16 to 18 pound backpack with me, which, by the way, also served me well because I had that pared down to 6 pounds by when I went on the Rim2Rim hike. But I carried a 16-pound backpack with me. So throw a backpack, if you're not too self-conscious, throw a backpack on and do a 10-mile on your treadmill at a pretty good incline. And you can vary the incline. And again, if you're not an experienced hiker, one of the things I would really want to encourage you to remember is that you don't want to and don't have to get on the hiking trail and suddenly be able to hike 20 miles. You don't want to get on the machines in your gym and being able to do 10 miles uphill. You want to work up to that. So don't get discouraged if you can't. As I said before, remember, this 71-year-old dude did it and did it well. So here's the final thought that I want to share with you. This hike, it is a wonderful hike. It is a genuinely wonderful hike. It is something to behold, not something to get through, unless maybe you're running rim to rim or rim to rim to rim. It's something to behold. This hike should bring a song to your heart and a song to your soul. It's that wonderful. And as you're taking the hike, as you're moving through the canyons, you should be telling yourself how happy you are you did the hike. You should be telling yourself how lucky you feel doing this hike. You should be telling yourself what a good time you're having. And you can do that. You really can. The key is you have to train You have to train hard. This hike is challenging, but it is doable. But you cannot, my own personal opinion is that if you take a half-assed approach to your training, if you take a half-assed approach to your training, you're just simply asking for trouble. So don't do it. You know, finish the hike with a great attitude and just appreciate just how incredible the journey was. So that's the end of my training hike. Excuse me, that's the end of my training video. Hope it was helpful to you. And I'll see you on the trails. There is one final part to this video that I'd like to add here. In the comments section, I'd love to hear from two groups of people. One group I'd like to hear from is the people who successfully did the Rim2Rim hike and how they trained for the hike. I think a broader perspective would give people who are anticipating doing the hike some real good insight into how different people trained. The second group of people I'd like to hear from, and if this isn't too painful or too personal, I'd love to, in the comments section, for people who had to get rescued off the hike, if they would consider sharing their story. What happened and why they think it happened and what people might be able to learn from it. I think that would be a really, really beneficial piece of information for potential hikers on the Rim2Rim trail to be able to have. So why don't you think about that? Again, feel free, use the comments section, and let's start a dialogue about this.